Have you ever imagined strolling into a courtroom, expecting your fame and fortune to shield you from the law, only to face a judge who's determined to hold you accountable for every reckless choice? In today's gripping story, a privileged socialite's arrogance collides head-on with unwavering justice, proving that no amount of wealth can buy true respect. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more inspiring stories like this. Welcome to Motivation for Success, where we explore life-changing tales that remind us of the power of humility, growth, and second chances. Stay with us to see how one courtroom confrontation transforms a life forever, and inspires us all to reflect on our own actions. It was a bright morning in Birchwood County, known for its upscale boutiques and pristine parks. Yet all the glamour outside stood in stark contrast to the tense energy inside the Birchwood County Courthouse. On any normal day, you'd see a steady procession of petty crime hearings, civil disputes, and traffic violations. But today promised something more dramatic. The halls were abuzz with reporters and curious onlookers, whispering about the high-profile hearing scheduled for mid-morning. At the center of this attention was a young socialite named Dalia Stone. People knew Dalia not for any notable accomplishments, but for the endless news of her lavish parties, flashy designer wardrobe, and an attitude that suggested she believed the rules did not apply to her. Rumor had it that she'd offended some powerful people and had finally landed herself in court for reckless behavior, yet again. In true Dalia fashion, she arrived late. The corridor echoed with the click of her stilettos as she strutted toward Courtroom C, dressed in a sleek ivory suit that likely cost more than the average person's monthly rent. A pair of oversized sunglasses concealed most of her face, but the confident tilt of her chin revealed her unmistakable self-importance. Her attorney, Roy Benson, rushed alongside her, urging her to move faster. Reporters snapped photos, while others pointed cameras, hollering, "Dalia! Over here!" She gave them the barest glance, rolling her eyes as though the entire world were a stage meant solely for her. Inside, the courtroom was already at capacity. People jostled for seats, and a low murmur of voices created a near-constant hum in the background. A bailiff announced, "Please take your seats, the session is about to begin." At the front, presiding over the bench, was Judge Arnold Reynolds, an individual known for fairness, unwavering composure, and exacting standards for courtroom decorum. The second Dalia entered, it was as if a gust of wind had blown in. Silence momentarily fell, replaced by hushed commentary from spectators. Some recognized Dalia from tabloids, others merely sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Judge Reynolds, in his late 50s, had a posture that radiated confidence without intimidation. His deep-set eyes caught the reflection of the overhead lights, giving him an air of authority that demanded respect. Dalia sashayed to the defendant's table, plunking down a quilted designer bag on the wooden surface. With a dramatic flourish, she removed her sunglasses and tossed them to the side, nearly knocking over a cup of water. Her attorney cleared his throat nervously, offering her a tight smile that screamed, "Please behave." Judge Reynolds rapped his gavel once, calling for order. "We are here to address the case of Dalia Stone versus Birchwood County, involving multiple counts of reckless driving, repeated parking violations, and endangerment of a pedestrian." He delivered the statement in a firm, measured voice that carried across the silent room. Dalia leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest, visibly unimpressed. Beside her, Attorney Benson attempted to straighten a stack of papers, his discomposure evident. He whispered to Dalia, likely instructing her to show respect. She shrugged him off, eyes drifting around as if bored. Some spectators exchanged knowing looks, everyone could tell trouble was brewing, for Dalia's posture telegraphed blatant disinterest. Judge Reynolds continued as if he hadn't noticed, though the slight furrow in his brow indicated he was keenly aware of Dalia's demeanor. Seated in the front row was the pedestrian Dalia had allegedly endangered, Mr. Martin Conway, a retired librarian in his mid-60s. His right arm rested in a makeshift sling, courtesy of a hairline fracture caused when he dove out of the path of Dalia's speeding vehicle. Each time Dalia glanced in his direction, her face betrayed irritation rather than concern. Mr. Conway, for his part, displayed neither malice nor hatred, only a calm sadness. It was the kind of disappointment you might have in someone who should have known better. Judge Reynolds gestured toward Mr. Conway. Before we begin, I want to note that Mr. Conway has incurred medical expenses related to a wrist injury, as well as emotional distress from this incident. He is present today to provide testimony if needed. Dalia's eyes briefly flicked in Mr. Conway's direction. She barely managed to hide a disdainful sniff. The tension in the room thickened. The prosecutor, Geneva Park, laid out the details: Dalia's repeated traffic offenses, her attempt to accelerate even when seeing a pedestrian in the crosswalk, and her show of disregard for traffic laws in a high-density area. Dalia yawned audibly during the reading of these charges, prompting more than a few eyebrows to rise among spectators. When it was time for Dalia to confirm her identity, she responded with a dismissive, "Yeah, that's me," as if the entire proceeding bored her. Judge Reynolds straightened a pile of documents. His voice took on a sharper edge. "Ms. Stone, I will remind you that this is a court of law. A measure of decorum and respect is not merely a suggestion, it's expected. Do you understand?" "Sure, Your Honor," Dalia replied, though her mocking tone undercut any semblance of civility. A soft, collective gasp wafted through the courtroom. In one swift exchange, Dalia had effectively challenged the authority of the very individual responsible for determining her fate. The judge paused, letting an uncomfortable silence take hold. Then, quietly, he said, "Ms. Stone, are you aware of the consequences these charges could carry? Not just fines or temporary inconveniences, but repercussions that might alter the course of your life." Dalia rolled her eyes as if to say, "Spare me the lecture." Louder, she answered, "I know I'll probably get stuck with some community service or maybe a fine. Frankly, this is all a bit overblown. Nobody got seriously hurt." A quiet hush fell again, broken only by the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Dalia's attorney seemed on the brink of desperation. He whispered furiously in her ear, but she shrugged him off. The tension was electric, and the onlookers leaned forward, sensing a moment of reckoning. Prosecutor Park stepped forward. "If it pleases the court, I have statements from witnesses who saw Ms. Stone's vehicle nearly strike Mr. Conway. Ms. Stone has a track record of traffic infractions, some of which led to minor accidents, though thankfully no one was injured until now. We believe the pattern indicates a disregard for public safety." She placed photos on the evidence table, traffic camera stills of Dalia's car zooming through red lights, or parked illegally in loading zones. Another image showed Mr. Conway lying on the sidewalk, clutching his wrist, moments after scrambling out of Dalia's way. Several heads turned to gauge Dalia's reaction. She merely shrugged, as though it were all a tedious formality. "Your Honor," Ms. Park continued, "we request appropriate consequences that reflect the severity of these actions and ensure the safety of our community." Judge Reynolds methodically recounted Dalia's violations: multiple unpaid tickets, 2 previous warnings for reckless driving, and now a direct endangerment case with injury. The list seemed endless. Each mention prompted a new wave of murmurs in the gallery. Dalia scrolled through her phone under the table, ignoring the gravity of the judge's words, though the bailiff promptly tapped her shoulder to request she put it away. She huffed but complied. When the judge finished, he glanced at Dalia. "Do you understand the pattern here, Ms. Stone? This isn't a single slip-up. This is repeated negligence." Her lips twisted into a half-smile. "Patterns, sure. I just don't see what the big deal is. Mr. Conway didn't die." If there had been any doubt about Dalia's flippant disposition, that remark dispelled it. A wave of disbelief coursed through the audience. Mr. Conway looked down at his arm in a sling, his expression now tinged with a quiet disappointment that spoke louder than anger ever could. Judge Reynolds closed a folder and sat back, arms folded. His silence weighed on everyone. No one dared to break it. Finally, he spoke. Ms. Stone, the seriousness of an offense doesn't hinge solely on the outcome. It also depends on the intent and regard, or disregard, for human life. The fact that Mr. Conway survived without life-altering injuries does not negate the recklessness of your behavior. Dalia's face reddened slightly, though whether from anger or embarrassment was anyone's guess. She straightened in her seat, ready to protest, but Judge Reynolds continued. Before I announce my decision, I would like to hear from Mr. Conway, if he's willing. Mr. Conway, would you share your perspective with this court? The bailiff guided Mr. Conway to a witness stand. He spoke softly, voice trembling from nerves or residual pain, maybe both. I was just crossing the street on my way to the library. I volunteer part-time, helping kids learn to read. When I saw the car coming, I froze for a moment. It was moving so fast, I honestly thought I might not make it. He paused to collect himself. She swerved at the last second, he continued, looking at Dalia, but I stumbled and landed on my wrist. I can't say if she intended to scare me or simply didn't care I was there. All I know is that it hurt. And it still hurts. A hush fell as the weight of Mr. Conway's words sank in. His tone carried no anger, just a solemn note of sorrow and disbelief that another person could be so indifferent to his well-being. After Mr. Conway's testimony, Judge Reynolds turned to Dalia. Ms. Stone, do you have anything to say to Mr. Conway or to this court before I announce the sentencing? She shifted uncomfortably, arms crossing again. I'm sorry he got hurt, she said, sounding anything but sincere. But it was just an accident, okay? It's not like I aimed for him. Let's not be dramatic. The tension reached new heights. This time, the gallery let out a collective gasp. Even Dalia's attorney lowered his head into his hands, as though bracing himself for the judge's reaction. Judge Reynolds took a deep breath, betraying a hint of frustration. Very well. Since you see no reason to accept responsibility, I will ensure the penalty addresses that oversight. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Judge Reynolds began, given the evidence of repeated carelessness and Ms. Stone's flagrant disregard for public safety, the court imposes the following. He then listed the standard consequences, a steep fine, license suspension, and obligatory driver's education courses. But what came next made Dalia's eyes widen. Additionally, the judge continued, Ms. Stone will complete 200 hours of community service, specifically at the Birchwood Outreach Shelter, which serves individuals and families facing homelessness or financial hardship. This will give her the opportunity to understand how one's actions can resonate throughout a community. Finally, if there is any failure to comply, Ms. Stone will return to this courtroom for a far more severe consequence. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged curious glances. Dalia looked stunned. She shot to her feet, mouth open in protest, but a single look from the judge silenced her. Attorney Benson gently tugged at her sleeve, urging her to sit. Judge Reynolds offered his concluding remarks, This court is not here to humiliate or ruin your life, Ms. Stone. It exists to maintain justice and, when possible, to teach. You have chosen to ignore repeated warnings. You've demonstrated a willingness to dismiss your fellow citizens' safety. Thus, I intend for your sentence to serve as both a consequence and a lesson in empathy. Court is adjourned. He banged the gavel, and the tension in the room loosened ever so slightly. Dalia, still reeling, glanced around as though unsure what to do. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing and microphones bobbing as they tried to capture every reaction. Mr. Conway rose slowly, acknowledging the judge and exiting before the throng of spectators flooded the aisles. Outside, the courthouse steps were choked with media. Microphones were thrust forward, voices clamoring, Ms. Stone, do you have any comment? Do you think the sentence is fair? Dalia kept her gaze forward, jaw clenched, ignoring every question. Her attorney struggled to keep up, failing in his attempts to shield her from the barrage. It was a far cry from the red carpet glam she was used to. Here, the attention felt invasive, even punishing. In the swirl of chaos, Dalia locked eyes with a local news camera. For a brief moment, she looked vulnerable, her bravado slipping. Then, in an instant, she looked away, scowling. She climbed into a waiting town car and slammed the door shut. The image followed her, cameras capturing her final glower before the tinted windows whisked her out of sight. Monday morning arrived with unusual apprehension for Dalia. She found herself outside the Birchwood Outreach Shelter, an unassuming building with peeling paint and a chipped sign. This was a world apart from her lofty penthouse and plush boutiques. Her usual style was on display, a designer coat, a silk scarf, and manicured nails. It all seemed jarringly out of place alongside the shelter's humble surroundings. Stepping inside, she was greeted by Aaliyah Miles, the shelter's volunteer coordinator. Aaliyah, a brisk, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, had overseen countless volunteers from varied backgrounds, but few had arrived with quite as much reluctance as Dalia. She eyed Dalia's glossy hair and couture coat, arching an eyebrow in silent appraisal before offering a polite smile. "Ms. Stone, welcome. We're glad to have you, please follow me. We'll start in the kitchen. The breakfast shift is behind schedule." Dalia's first task was washing dishes. The industrial sink lined with sticky plates, half-eaten pancakes, and coffee-stained mugs. She stared in dismay as Aaliyah handed her gloves. "We serve about 100 people in the morning. We need to keep clean dishes ready at all times." The sink's hot water and the stench of old food jolted Dalia's senses. She tried to hide her revulsion, but her grimace betrayed her. Aaliyah, noticing Dalia's discomfort, simply shrugged. "They need help, Ms. Stone, and we need you to do your share." Though her initial inclination was to argue, Dalia remained silent. The memory of Judge Reynolds' stern warning still stung, and she knew that any misstep could land her back in a courtroom. So she set about scrubbing plates, forcing herself not to recoil. After the dishes, Dalia found herself tasked with helping serve lunch. A line of patrons wound around the shelter's main hall, individuals of all ages, some with tired eyes and worn clothing, others clinging to small children. Dalia tried to avoid their gazes, but it was impossible not to notice the stories etched in their faces, stories of hardship, resilience, and survival. A middle-aged woman named Brittany, who struggled to keep her 2 toddlers from wandering, paused to speak with Dalia. "Thanks for helping," she said, managing a weary smile as she accepted a tray of warm food. "We don't often get folks like you volunteering." Dalia forced a smile back. "Well, I'm learning," she answered simply. For the first time in a while, Dalia didn't have a clever comeback. She didn't roll her eyes or scoff. There was something humbling about seeing real hardship. She wondered whether she had ever faced anything genuinely difficult in her life. Her mind drifted to the notion of a broken wrist, an injury she had once brushed off as no big deal. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, Dalia arrived at the shelter, trading her typical glam for older jeans and a sweatshirt, still designer, but decidedly less ostentatious. She cleaned floors, organized donation bins, and listened quietly as patrons shared snippets of their struggles. When asked where she came from, Dalia usually said, "I'm just volunteering here," neglecting to mention the court order. Pride still lingered, but something within her was shifting. She noticed how the shelter's patrons supported one another. A single father coaxed a friend's child to eat. A teenage girl helped an older woman fold laundry. Acts of generosity were everywhere. And Dalia found herself witnessing a sense of community stronger than any she'd seen among the upper crust she once associated with. Late one night, after the shelter's doors had closed to visitors, Dalia stayed to help Aaliyah mop the floors. The once bustling hall was now deserted. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a mellow glow on the cracked tiles. As they worked, Dalia found herself talking, truly talking, for the first time since she'd arrived. "Why are you here so late, Ms. Miles?" Dalia asked, rinsing out her mop. "You must be exhausted." Aaliyah shrugged. "There's always more to do. I have to make sure we're ready for tomorrow. That's just how it goes." She paused, then looked at Dalia. "But what about you? You could have left hours ago." Caught off guard, Dalia didn't have a slick response. "I guess I wanted to finish the job. Doesn't feel right leaving it halfway done." She stared at the mop bucket, as though it were the most fascinating thing in the room. It was a small moment, but it carried a weight that both women felt. After completing the required hours, though Dalia had volunteered longer than mandated, she found herself back in Judge Reynolds's courtroom. This time, the air felt different. She sat quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered until the judge addressed her. Judge Reynolds surveyed her for a moment before speaking. "Ms. Stone, according to reports from Birchwood Outreach Shelter, you successfully completed the 200 hours of community service assigned to you. I also understand you continued volunteering even after reaching those hours. Is that correct?" Dalia cleared her throat, her voice much softer now. "Yes, Your Honor." "And why did you continue?" His tone was inquisitive, not scolding. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I realize that not everyone has the advantages I do, and I saw how important it is to respect that fact. I felt I owed it to myself and to the people I met to keep helping." A hush settled over the courtroom. Even Dalia's attorney appeared momentarily moved. Judge Reynolds set down his papers. "I commend you for that. But understand, your time at the shelter was not just about paying a penalty, it was about gaining perspective. I hope you carry that lesson forward. The next time you find yourself behind the wheel, or anywhere else in life, remember the people whose names you might never know, but whose lives can be directly impacted by your actions." Dalia gave a faint nod. "I do understand, Your Honor." With a small smile, Judge Reynolds dismissed the case, stating that Dalia had fulfilled her obligations. Court was adjourned. No throngs of reporters waited this time, just a few curious onlookers. Dalia exited the courthouse quietly, her posture no longer steeped in the same self-assured arrogance. She looked up at the morning sun and allowed herself a small breath of relief. Over the next few weeks, Dalia found herself reflecting on the people she'd met at the shelter, Brittany with her toddlers, the father who once shared leftover fruit so another child could have vitamins, and the elderly couple who'd lost their home to medical bills. She realized that behind every face was a story, behind every story a challenge, and behind every challenge a resilience she'd never bothered to notice before. The moment she watched a young child in the shelter share half a sandwich with another kid who had none, Dalia began to question her own assumptions about wealth, entitlement, and community. She thought back to the day she brushed off Mr. Conway's injury, recalling how easily she'd laughed it off. Now, that memory weighed on her, prompting an unfamiliar pang of remorse. A few days later, she returned to the shelter on her own accord, surprising Aaliyah once more. This time, Dalia carried a box of donated clothes, expensive handbags she rarely used, designer coats she now found excessive, and brand-name shoes she admitted she didn't need. Aaliyah gave her a curious look. "You're not required to come back anymore, Dalia. Why are you here?" Dalia managed a small smile. "Because I want to be. I realize I have so much that others could put to better use. That includes my time." The next morning at the shelter, Dalia bumped into a familiar face. Mr. Conway, yes, the same man she'd nearly run over, was delivering donated books for the shelter's reading corner. He recognized her instantly, pausing as if uncertain how to greet her. Dalia froze, unsure whether to apologize again or say nothing at all. Finally, she mustered the courage to speak. "Mr. Conway, I'm so sorry for what happened. I was reckless. You have every right to hate me, but I just wanted you to know that I've changed, or at least I'm trying to." Mr. Conway smiled gently, the kind of smile that conveyed forgiveness without needing grand gestures. "I never hated you. I just wanted you to understand." He tapped the crate of books. "People deserve second chances, but we also have to realize our actions carry weight." That simple encounter left Dalia with a lingering sense of humility and gratitude. She realized that while she couldn't undo what she'd done, she could choose how to move forward. More and more, she found herself craving genuine connections and purposeful living, things that had been absent when she was consumed by her own ego. Judge Reynolds's words echoed in Dalia's mind, "When possible, we teach." She recognized how the judge's sentence had not just been punitive, it was transformative. In the end, it wasn't about humiliating her, it was about guiding her toward empathy. Reflecting on her old life, champagne galas and paparazzi-laden exits, Dalia felt a strange detachment. Those thrills no longer held the same appeal. Real fulfillment, she discovered, often comes from helping others find a foothold when life has knocked them down. One crisp afternoon, Dalia sat on a bench outside the shelter, watching the bustle of volunteers handing out meals. A subtle warmth bloomed in her chest, pride at being part of something bigger than herself. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, and it certainly wasn't perfect. She still struggled with old habits and occasional bursts of vanity, but she was evolving, step by step. Her phone buzzed with a new text message from an acquaintance who invited her to a luxury yacht party. Dalia contemplated the invitation. For a moment, old temptations tugged at her, but she found herself typing, "Sorry, I'm busy volunteering, maybe another time." That might have been a small step, but it was a meaningful one. Not long after, Dalia was asked to speak briefly to a local group of teens who volunteered at the shelter. Nervous yet determined, she recounted her story, minus the most embarrassing details, and emphasized how one careless action can ripple through another person's life. "I was too wrapped up in my own world to see beyond it," she admitted. "I learned the hard way that empathy means recognizing we're all interconnected. If you can learn this without going to court, you'll save yourselves, and others, a lot of pain." The teens listened, enthralled by the tale of a socialite turned volunteer. One girl raised her hand, asking, "Was it scary, facing that judge?" Dalia chuckled softly, replying, "It was terrifying, but not as scary as realizing I almost ruined someone else's life." And here we are, dear viewer. Dalia Stone's journey is a testament to the idea that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to face the consequences of their actions and truly open their eyes to the world around them. From a privileged individual who scoffed at traffic laws, she transformed into someone who recognized her capacity for empathy and service. This story also underscores that justice isn't simply about punishment, it can be about guiding someone to a better path. Judge Reynolds believed that if Dalia gained perspective, she would change. And change she did, not through fiery speeches or grand epiphanies, but through the steady, humbling work of community service and one-on-one interactions with people she once deemed beneath her. So, what about you? Have you ever experienced a wake-up call that made you see life differently? Did a single event shift your perspective so drastically that you rethought your priorities? Let us know in the comments, we'd love to hear your stories and reflections. Such moments can happen in countless ways: a challenging job, a life-changing trip, an unexpected encounter with someone less fortunate, or even a stern judge who refuses to let you off easy. And remember, if you haven't done so yet, click subscribe to stay connected with motivation for success. We bring you real-life stories meant to spark thought, change, and, most of all, hope. Each tale is a reminder that growth is possible, no matter how entrenched we might be in our habits. Dalia's story ends with a note of optimism. She continues volunteering at the Birchwood Outreach Shelter, even after fulfilling her court mandate. Her social circle has shifted, with fewer sycophants and more genuine friends who value service over status. Mr. Conway, fully recovered, occasionally drops by the shelter with donations of books. They greet each other warmly, no bitterness, no grudges, just mutual respect born out of a difficult lesson learned. Dalia also founded a small scholarship fund at a local community college, anonymously covering enrollment fees for first-generation students. It's a quiet gesture, but one that carries forward the very empathy she once lacked. In the end, the measure of Dalia's transformation isn't just in how she dresses or which events she attends, it's in the sincerity of her actions. She's learned to look beyond herself, to appreciate that every person has a story as real and complex as her own. From the red carpet illusions of the privileged world she once inhabited, she has stepped, albeit hesitantly, into a community that grounds her. Her story echoes across Birchwood County, reminding onlookers that sometimes, justice can be more than a verdict. It can be a catalyst for genuine, life-altering change. Thank you for staying with us through Dalia's transformative journey. Stories like this encourage us to pause and think, are we treating people with respect and empathy, or are we breezing past them in our quest for personal gain? Whether you see yourself in Dalia, or you've been on the receiving end of someone else's carelessness, there's a lesson here for all of us. Remember, our channel, Motivation for Success, exists to shine a light on moral tales, inspiring personal growth. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. By joining our community, you help us continue sharing stories that teach, uplift, and remind us that there's always room to become better versions of ourselves. We invite you now to share your own reflections. Have you ever been in a situation that forced you to confront your own privilege or assumptions? What did you learn from that experience? Please drop your thoughts below. Your reflections could resonate with someone who needs to hear them. And remember, these lessons aren't limited to the confines of a courtroom or a volunteer shift. Compassion can start right in your own neighborhood, school, or workplace. Before we wrap up, let's return to one of the core lessons Dalia learned: it's never too late to change. Even if you've taken a few missteps, or many, life has a way of offering second chances. Your willingness to embrace them is what matters most. Think about the small ways you can incorporate kindness into your daily routine. You never know who might be in need of that extra dose of empathy. We hope this retelling of Dalia Stone's courtroom saga serves as a reminder that arrogance can lead to hard lessons, but humility and compassion can lead to hope. Each day, we decide how we treat the people around us. Each day, we have a chance to extend a helping hand or a harsh word. Which will you choose? From all of us at Motivation for Success, thank you for tuning in. If you found value in today's story, give us a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need a nudge in the right direction, and be sure to stay connected by subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us reach more people with messages that matter. If this story moved you, consider spreading kindness today. It doesn't require a grand gesture. Sometimes, it's the small, thoughtful acts, like listening when someone needs to talk, or offering a helping hand in moments of stress, that make the biggest difference. Reflect on Dalia's tale and remember, empathy can spark profound change, in both our own hearts and the hearts of those around us. Until next time, stay inspired, stay open-hearted, and keep striving to be the change you want to see in the world. We'll see you again soon here on Motivation for Success.